He wrote one this morning before breakfast. I have to recommend that, among the top 15 or 20 titles of his that you have to read, you need to read his book on Oscar Wilde, his book on Solzhenitsyn, his book on Shakespeare, his book on Belloc, and his book on Chesterton. And then his book on C.S. Lewis, his book on Tolkien. And then that book of his literary conference too. And the main one you have to read in terms of this conference is Small is Still Beautiful, which will probably have something to do with the comments that he's about to give. But please give him a warm welcome to my friend Joseph Pearce.
One of the things that I don't like about American television, it's even worse than British television, are the commercial breaks, which seem to be longer than the actual programming. But I was sort of hoping that commercial break would go on and on and on right through this particular program, and then you all go out and buy my books, and I get out of giving the talk. All good things must come to an end. But Dale, I think, set the right tone this morning, the right sort of bellicose, Bellocian tone, by saying that you should all expect to be offended while you're here. And so I'm always inspired by Dale Osquist and always trying to do my best. I'm going to begin by offending all of you. And I just merely comment, as Dale insisted on bringing up the unfortunate incident of the Boston Tea Party, that any nation that begins by the destruction of a wonderful drink, such as tea, really setting itself off on a downward spiral, which you've been on ever since. And the other thing I would say also, by the way, is that, because I do believe that small is beautiful, I never ever refer to myself as British. I'm an Englishman. And the British Empire was an example of something that was too big to fail, until, of course, like all things that are too big to fail, it failed. And as an Englishman, I relish the prospect in the future of the Scots getting their independence and the Welsh getting their independence, and we can all live happily ever after. But the subject today is Small is Beautiful, and my book was Small is Still Beautiful, and I'll explain the title for that. But basically, years and years ago, when I was an angry young man, I believed that all the problems in the world could be solved through politics and economics. I've long since given up that particular fantasy. But Chesterton was the person who set me on the right path through his writing of the book The Outline of Sanity, and through his writing of an essays such as Reflections on a Rotten Apple. And I really do think that Chesterton and Belloc would be very happy to have a Chesterton conference in Minnesota on this particular theme, because it's quite clearly close to their hearts. I heard somewhere that the original title of Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, was Chestertonian Economics. I've not ever been able to substantiate that beyond being a rumor, but nonetheless it was enough for me as a committed Chestertonian to check the book out. Small is Beautiful, and I read it. It was originally published in 1973. I came to realise that Schumacher, when I was doing my research for literary converts, was indeed also a convert to Catholicism. And that indeed he converted to Catholicism while he was writing Small is Beautiful. And that the reason he converted to Catholicism was because he was very impressed by the papal encyclicals. Now, he was told by his friend Christopher Derrick that if he was really doing some serious research about, well, economics as if people matter, which was the subtitle of his book, he really should check out the papal encyclicals. And Schumacher, who began as a Marxist, we had in the previous talk this sort of talk about the spectrum from libertarians on one side of the spectrum to Marxists on the other. Well, Schumacher began very much over here with the Marxists. But Schumacher responded, what do those popes in their ivory tower have to know? What do they know about real problems in the world? But anyway, in spite of his protests, in deference to his friendship, he read Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII and Quadragesimo Anno by Pope Pius XI, and also Humanae Vitae by Pope Paul VI, all of which impacted him immensely and was the principal major influence upon his own conversion to Catholicism. Now that book, Small is Beautiful, was so influential that really a large part of what we would now call the Green Movement owes its genesis to the success of that book. It sold millions of copies. Now think about that, a book of economics selling millions of copies, published in loads of different languages throughout the world. I remember there's a photograph of Schumacher meeting Jimmy Carter on the steps of the White House. Now I'm cynical enough about politicians to believe that Jimmy Carter really saw this as a photo opportunity. Sort of like the proverbial politician kissing babies, you know. But the interesting thing is, why would a US president want to be photographed on the steps of the White House smiling side by side with Leo Schumacher? It's because Schumacher's book had changed the whole landscape of the way that we viewed economics and politics on the basis of size matters. So, the Holy Father, Benedict XVI, no encyclical, in his talk about subsidiarity, we've got to talk about that later this afternoon, takes these cudgels up. And all of it, of course, Belloc first became involved in what became known as distributism by trying to show how the social teaching of the Catholic Church was different from socialism. So, for instance, his early pamphlets were the Catholic Church and socialism, and the Catholic Church and the principle of private property. And this grew up into the distributist movement. Now, distributism is an ugly word, and not a very clear one. Chesterton himself lamented that fact. Subsidiarity, the word most akin to it that the Church uses, is also an ugly word, but at least it does sort of signify what it says. But whatever we want to call it, and we are handicapped by the fact that we don't have a good label, it is the most important issue facing us today in the sphere of politics and economics. So much so that we should really judge the way that we act and the way that we vote based upon these issues. In the past, it was always presumed that we had a choice, and many of our politicians, including our present president, seem to still believe this, that we either have to have rule by big business or rule by big government. We have to accept one of those two, even if we think perhaps we're choosing between two evils. But the situation is worse than that, because what we actually have and what we're getting is rule by big government and big business, hand in glove, hand in hand. And again, the very informative talks this morning showed exactly how that is still the case and how President Obama's policies are completely hand in hand with the Federal Reserve, etc. I do feel, by the way, by way of a parenthesis here, that in the wake of those two wonderful learned talks, here you have someone who writes books about Christian writers following on, and I'm only comforted by the fact that, as Chesterton said, the things worth doing at all, it's worth doing badly.